Welcome back for another walk and talk. Just to show you where I am, by the way, I'm by the canals in Birmingham. This is where I go for my walks. It's just a lovely sort of beautiful area in the inner city of Birmingham. It's peaceful. You can hear birds sing, but in the background you can also hear traffic going on the motorway across the M6. And we're about to go past the Alexander Stadium where the Commonwealth Games were hosted. I just love walking down here. It's one of the places I come to walk, come to exercise, come to relax and de-stress. It's where I come to think things through. It's where I come to pray as well quite often. But I wanted to just talk a little bit more in this walk and talk about what's been in the news this past week. Again, you'll have seen that I've written things on Faith Roots about what's been happening with Ukraine, what's been happening with Donald Trump in the White House last week. And I thought it was worth just talking through a few things, Donald Trump and Zelensky and JD Vance. I thought it was worth just actually sticking a couple of videos out, just thinking and talking about that. I'm probably going to go back and talk about the actual events in the White House last week. But I first of all wanted to just take a step back a bit and think about how those of us here in the United Kingdom, here in Europe, and the rest of the world, how we relate to what is going on, not just in Ukraine, in Ukraine, but also in the United States as well, and our understanding, our perception of things. By the way, yes, this is getting a little bit into politics and stuff like that. I try not to be party political, although I do have my own sympathies and preferences. But I think it is helpful for Christians just to try to have an understanding of current affairs. And from there, it's when we've got that understanding of what is going on that we can then start to think about how we live as Christians in the world as it is, what God's word has to say to it. But there's a stepping back and observing, learning to see, first of all, and that will build into then learning to see things as God sees them. Well, what struck me and has struck many people over the past few days is how events can be seen and perceived completely differently. I suspect, based on the interactions I get on social media, that a lot of those that are likely to watch this video, because you already know me, and maybe others who join in anyway and have different views, but a lot of those of you that already know me, that you pick up the link on my personal accounts on Faith Roots or on Facebook, I suspect that a lot of you will have seen what happened in the White House very much the same way that I did. I was horrified. It looked like an absolute car crash. I could not believe what was being said and being done. And I thought that from my perspective, that if Keir Starmer had behaved that way, it would have been career over, it would be game over. There would have been a vote of confidence in the House of Commons this week, and he would be out of office and there'd be no comeback. And the crucial point is this. It is if he had acted like Donald Trump and JD Vance in that meeting, not like Zelensky. Because what I saw was a war hero, a man of honor who had stayed in his country when he was offered a way out to resist a foreign invasion, arriving at the White House, and of course seeking to make his point, to argue his case, but doing it respectfully, whilst he was shouted down, whilst men who have only just come into office, who have not been involved at any stage in any way in actually providing resources, because that was all agreed in the past, demanded respect and gratitude. I think it would be legitimate to ask, what exactly am I to be grateful to you personally for? And I can't imagine our Prime Minister treating any democratic leader from another country in that kind of way and surviving it. And there was a bit of me that thought, that is so visual, so obvious, that even the strongest supporters of the current administration in the States must, the scales must go from their eyes and must see what is going on. But then I began to realise and to see that, whilst that was how I saw it, actually there were lots and lots of people in the United States, and in other countries as well, but particularly in the United States, who saw it very differently, who saw Donald Trump and JD Vance as both the victims and the heroes, not the oppressors in that situation, who think that's great, Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky got what was coming to them, what they deserved, and are outraged at this bloke turning up in the White House without a suit on, forgetting that Winston Churchill had arrived during the Second World War in the White House, not wearing a suit, that Mandela had, that even just the last week Elon Musk had been there at a cabinet meeting in a baseball cap and t-shirt. But we have short memories, don't we? Well, I think it is important for us to remember that people see things very differently, and that there are differences between how we are looking at things here in Europe and how, I guess, the more liberal, progressive sides of the States are seeing things, to how others, those that voted for Donald Trump because they felt left behind, because they thought that America was getting a rotten deal, because they thought he was going to make America great again, because they thought he was going to make their lives better again, how they might be seeing things. And I think one of the reasons is this, that we often surround ourselves and connect to people who think and act and talk and like us. I've just come in onto the motorway bridge, by the way, the motorway I mentioned that cuts right across this peaceful haven. Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we had a similar issue back in 2016 here in the United Kingdom, where lots and lots of people were convinced that there wasn't a case for Brexit, that Brexit wouldn't happen, and that the referendum would be won by Remain by an overwhelming margin, and were shocked, crushed when they discovered that their side had lost. I just couldn't conceive that anybody could agree with leaving the European Union. I believed it to be totally immoral. And what we began to observe was this phenomenon where people were connecting, particularly on social media, but also in their in-person real lives, with people that they agreed with. So Remain supporters were only talking to other Remain supporters, and that was distorting their perception of what was happening on the other side. That became intentional when you had that hashtag of follow back pro EU. I remember I was on Twitter at the time, and I offered a counter hashtag that didn't take back, that didn't take off, but it was basically because I will follow you back even if we disagree, because we should be able to do that. But the result, I think, is similar and probably involves the same kinds of people as well. That I suspect there's a lot of us who primarily are connecting with other people who have the same outlook, the same perceptions, the same starting point with regards to Donald Trump and JD Vance, and don't have much connection with his supporters. But we may have some connections with Americans who agree with our outlook. And there's a couple of challenges to that. The first challenge is that we may not understand why people have made the choices and the decisions that they have. And I think it's important that we learn to do that. We may still disagree with them, but it's important that we understand why they believe what they do, why they act like they do. In fact, in order to win an argument, to build your own case, you need to be able to do that. But also, one of my concerns at the moment is this. Not just ordinary powerless citizens like me and you, making and watching videos, commenting on Facebook, but actually how this sort of reaches up into the establishment, into government and opposition here in the United Kingdom and across Europe. And it's this. I think there's a real risk that people will assume, that governments and leaders will assume, and be working on the basis that what we have seen these past few weeks is just an aberration, just temporary. I suspect that the big hope is that we've got 4 years of Donald Trump and then it's over. Things can get back to normal. That the candidates in the 2028 presidential election will effectively represent the old-style conventional Democrats and Republicans. That might happen, but I'm not convinced. First of all, because I suspect that what will happen on the Democrat side, I'm just speculating here, is that there will be even greater support for the kind of the Bernie Sanders kind of figures, that it will polarize things, and the reaction will be to entrench positions that in some ways are extreme to the other side, but also in other ways are very, very much the same. It's fascinating, isn't it, that the extreme left and the extreme right seem to be just as keen to give Vladimir Putin the benefit of the doubt, just as keen to say we should be staying out of things, they're not our business, that kind of thing. But also I suspect that whilst this is Trump's final term, that his successor will be in the same mould or the similar mould. That if, like me, you think of actually what he offers as quite nasty, quite dangerous, quite extreme, that we will see more of it. And in many respects, more dangerous in that I suspect that his successor will be the true believer. Donald Trump is essentially a businessman whose history was amongst the liberals, but has seen an opportunity to build a platform on a particular political agenda The true believers are coming through. And I think it was telling that in the White House on Friday, the real trigger point came not with a conversation between Zelensky and Trump. I thought Trump looked to be in listening mode when Zelensky was speaking, until he later got triggered. I'm not sure he was really understanding or grasping what Zelensky was saying. I don't think he understands Zelensky, because I don't think he understands people that that don't see things in terms of just cutting a deal, pragmatic benefit. But it was others in the room, media guys and the vice president, who were stirring things up. So at this stage, obviously, a week is a short time in politics. Anything can change. 4 years or even longer. But I suspect that the expectation is that Vance will succeed Trump, at least as the candidate. That if he does, then he will be able to maintain momentum and will become president. It's worth noting that whilst in the last few weeks we've seen Donald Trump's popularity start to fall, it's still higher than a lot of our leaders on this side of the Atlantic can even dream of, but it's a lot lower than was expected, perhaps a lot lower than you would expect for a president at this stage. But it's not falling, I would argue, because people think that he has been too harsh on Ukraine. I suspect it is falling because people were concerned that he was continuing to provide the military support, because he was willing to cut a deal. Because when you look at JD Vance's figures, his popularity has been increasing as he's gained more visibility. I think we've also got to factor in something else. Donald Trump, he's going to be into his 80s by the time his term in office ends. In that respect, he's in a similar position to Biden. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people around him are a little bit more ruthless in what they will do than those around Biden were. I think a lot of people expected Biden to make way for Kamala Harris mid-term, with the excuse of health being given. That didn't happen. It wasn't pushed for. But I wouldn't be surprised if those kind of stories start to circulate, and that more ambitious, more ruthless people use it to go forward, particularly if things aren't working quite according to plan. But either way, I do think, I'm speculating now, I do think we've got to be realistic. This isn't just something short term, this is the future direction. And that's the future direction in a couple of ways. It's the future direction in terms of those kind of right-wing populist kind of trends and nationalists, America first, but also we're seeing that in Europe, the AfD in Germany, we're seeing the way that Reform UK are really getting a foothold here in the United Kingdom. And I suspect that Conservatives and Labour alike here would hope that was a flash in the pan that Reform UK will die away. I don't think we can guarantee that. I think they might be here to stay. So if he does, And also to stay, I think often the hope is that as a party like that gets established, moderate its position. I'm not sure it will. I think in the case of Reform UK here in the United Kingdom, that in many ways, whilst I particularly like Nigel Farage or his approach, I suspect that actually he is the one that holds back some of the more extreme elements. He has been the one that has been insisting that those who had a past in far-right parties were not welcome in UKIP and then Reform UK. There's no guarantee that he will be succeeded by someone perceived as more moderate, more adaptable to the kind of mainstream. But that's the United Kingdom. That's for another day, perhaps. Back to the United States, I think there's another factor we need to consider and think about it. It's this. We seem to assume that this approach to isolationism, this America First kind of thinking, started with Donald Trump. Actually, it didn't. If you're old enough to remember and geeky enough to be interested in the politics and remember them, back in 2000 there was a candidate for the presidency who was arguing that Bill Clinton had got too caught up in the foreign adventures and that it was time to focus more on domestic politics. That the United States needed to put its own interests first. That was a guy called George W. Bush. And I think we would have seen accelerated kind of isolation right back then if it hadn't been for 9/11, which forced the United States both to look outside to the wider world and to reach out to allies around the world. You know, one of the ironies is that this kind of attitude of we owe the old world, we owe Europe nothing, we want you to start pulling your weight. That seems to forget that back in 2001, it was the United Kingdom and others that stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States. And also, that's why J.D. Vance's claims that that countries offering to put troops into Ukraine didn't have any sort of experience of military engagement. In the past 25 years, the United Kingdom has been very heavily involved in military engagement in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, going back further, Sierra Leone. I've heard of that same sort of time. Back further, Kosovo, of course, back the previous Gulf War, and then back to the Falklands before then. But George W. Bush had that kind of desire. And increasingly after him, that again is what we saw. That was the way that Obama was thinking. Less interested in Europe, more interested in what was happening at home, more interested in the Far East. That continued with Biden. The centre of gravity, the centre of interest had already changed, and America's mindset was already, we're pulling back. So, just on that question of what does the long-term future look like, is it reasonable to expect that America will return to a position where it puts troops, security into Europe, well, I don't think we're going to go back to that anytime soon. And so the question for our leaders then is, what strategy should we take? And I don't think that we can simply take the strategy of we just need to find a way to just keep Donald Trump interested long enough until someone different comes along. I think we need to recognise the trajectory we're on, and we need to plan accordingly for that. Well, thanks for watching in, and look forward to joining you next time.